And now it's time for the real news with your host, Marion.
Hello and welcome to the Real News. This is your weekly discussion of politics and current events. This week we have seen more financial collapses and government bailouts. This will be our subject today, our economy run aground by our leaders. And when we go to the phones, I want to hear from you, the public. Our guest today is Kay Hagen, Democrat candidate for U.S. Senate. She will be joining us very shortly. So it has been a very interesting week, to say the least. So let's get started. To begin, I wanted to comment on these cascading dominoes of bailouts. We have witnessed something very interesting. I bet the rest of the world gets a real chuckle out of watching how ridiculous our country has become. We witnessed our bankrupt government bail out bankrupt banks to the tune of some say $1 trillion. This can only be done two ways. One, by going further in debt, or two, by printing money 24 hours a day, and they are doing both. Only in America, and this is a complete opposite of capitalism. This is socialism, government-owned economy instead of a free market society. Also, for all the listeners, we are about as completely the opposite of the show that precedes us, The View. We are pro-gun. Cities that have had harsher gun laws time and time again watch their crime statistics soar. Communities with an armed citizenry, crime goes down. If it's the gun's fault when someone commits a murder, then why don't we put the gun in jail? Only a well-armed citizenry is our best defense to defend our liberties and oppose government tyranny. So I wanted to get that said today, and to get us started, and we're waiting on Kay Hagen to call us. She's going to call us very soon, so that's going to happen, and we're going to ask her some questions. After our second break, we'll go to the phone calls. We want to hear what everyone has to say about the financial collapses that we took some heat for starting to warn about 5 months ago, and now we're seeing it come to fruition this very week. So we'll go to Brian at this time. What you got for us today, Brian?
This is a headline I saw yesterday, and I just had to say something about it today. This is a poll by the Associated Press, Yahoo News. Poll, Obama tops McCain as football-watching buddy. Now, this was right on the Yahoo main page, and my instantaneous reaction was, you know, I'd much rather want to know how he's going to be as commander-in-chief or economist, but it seems like people want to know which one they'd rather watch football with, Obama or McCain.
Isn't it amazing? And like we've said, this election, this time, you don't see the signs out in people's yards. People aren't energized. The people I talk to don't like either candidate. They feel like it's lesser of two evils. Once again, that's where we find ourselves at.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go ahead and take a break. We'll get that out of the way so that we can wait for Ms. Hagen's call. So we're going to go to a break, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. You're on The Real News, WSIC 1400, WDSL 1520.
At the Real News Radio, this is also a article I found earlier in the week. This is something we've been talking about here for weeks, as you're well aware of, is the situation in Russia with the invasion of Georgia. Most of the major mainstream U.S. media has been touting that Russia had invaded Georgia, which actually the opposite occurred, and you have to really dig within the alternative media, like the Real News Radio, to find the truth. And this is an article I came across. It says, U.S. politicians admit Georgia started the conflict with Russia. Some U.S. politicians are now beginning to admit that Georgia started the conflict with Russia. For example, the U.S. ambassador to Russia said a couple of weeks ago that Russia initially started a military response which was legitimate after the Georgian forces had invaded South Ossetia. And in an even larger development, we even have Condoleezza Rice saying, and I quote, the Georgian government launched a major military operation into the capital of South Ossetia and other areas of the separatist region, and regrettably, several Russian peacekeepers were killed in the fighting. Now again, in case you haven't been keeping up with the situation, according to major U.S. media, Russia actually invaded into Georgia, which of course is not true. The U.S.-backed Georgian military, and this has been confirmed by numerous sources, went into South Ossetia, and the Russians came in simply to protect people in South Ossetia, as they have been doing for decades.
And it's just amazing. We saw Dick Cheney go over there and offer $1 billion to bail out Georgia, the aggressor that started it. Our media tried to tell us a complete lie. Then they had to come kicking and screaming and admit the truth. And here our bankrupt government once again doling out the money in foreign aid by the billions to a country that started the war, our puppet, Georgia. And to get back on the topic of the bailout, yesterday, Senate Banking Committee Chairman Chris Dodd says the United States may be days away from a complete meltdown of our financial system, and Congress is working quickly to prevent that. Dodd said Friday that Democrats and Republicans on the Hill are coming together to support the Bush administration's developing plan to buy up bad debt from financial institutions and get the credit system working again. Dodd told ABC's Good Morning America that the nation's credit is seizing up and people can't get loans. The ranking Republican on the Banking Committee, Senator Richard Shelby, predicts the new bailout plan will cost at least $500 billion. Shelby says the nation has been lurching from one crisis to another. Both veteran lawmakers say this is the most serious financial crisis they've seen in their years in Congress. And that's going to be our subject today. We would like people to call in after a second break and tell us what you think about seeing our federal government bailing out banks, insurance agencies. The government is bailing out financial institutions, and most of these loans were made by the private sector. And you and me, Mr. and Mrs. America, is on the hook for what they are saying now is $1 trillion, so obviously it will cost many times more than they speculate. Again, this was on Good Morning America yesterday. This financial debacle should make everyone question whether we should accept this kind of incompetence by our government, or if now is the time for the people to rally and demand a real government of we the people, not this sham of hypocrites, destroyers of our children's futures, and apparently our own to boot. And I also wanted to report a little bit what was in China's paper this week, and this was reported by Reuters. Beijing, threatened by a financial tsunami, the world must consider building a financial order no longer dependent on the United States, a leading Chinese state newspaper said on Wednesday. The commentary in the overseas edition of the People's Daily said the collapse of Lehman Brothers holdings may augur an even larger, impending global financial tsunami. The People's Daily is the official newspaper of China's ruling Communist Party, and the overseas edition is a smaller circulation offshoot of the main paper. The eruption of the U.S. subprime crisis has exposed massive loopholes in the United States financial oversight and supervision, writes the commentator. The world urgently needs to create a diversified currency and financial system and fair and just financial order that is not dependent on the United States. Now, this is what they're reporting in China. China is a major buyer of U.S. Treasury bonds, and through its sovereign wealth fund, it has taken stakes in two large U.S. financial institutions. In July 2005, China revalued the yen and freed it from a dollar peg to float within managed bands. But the yen and China's trade remains tightly linked to the fortunes of the dollar. The commentary suggests China must brace for grave economic fallout and look to alternatives, saying the crisis brings to mind the Great Depression of the 1930s. Lehman Brothers' announced bankruptcy will not only have a domino effect on the global financial world, it will bring a shock to the world economy, the front page comment stated. So I wanted to report that the papers are saying in China we need a new order, a new financial order, no longer dependent on the United States. I prognosticate we will hear a lot more of this from the world, and we will find out who our friends really are, and I suspect we have few to none. But this is major news when we see what China thinks our fortunes hold as far as a recession, or as they have stated here,